3 words. That's all it took. 3 words in an internal Nike memo that corporate executives never wanted you to see. Terminate effective immediately. And just like that, one of the biggest sponsorship deals in women's basketball history went up in flames. But here's what's truly insane about this whole situation. This wasn't about missed shots. This wasn't about injuries. This wasn't about poor performance on the court. No, this was about something far more damaging. Something that started with a suitcase and ended with Nike scrambling to protect a billion-dollar brand before the walls came crashing down. Now, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, step by step, document by document, because what you're about to discover reveals something far bigger than just one athlete losing a shoe deal. This exposes how corporations really operate behind closed doors when their investments stop making sense. Let me set the stage for you. It's early 2025. Paige Bueckers is everywhere. Unrivaled league, Lego partnerships, Nike signature athlete status, magazine covers, social media buzz. On paper, she's positioned as the next face of women's basketball. But there's a massive problem. The numbers weren't adding up. And I'm not talking about points per game. I'm talking about the only numbers that matter to publicly traded corporations answerable to shareholders, sales figures. You see, while everyone was celebrating these massive endorsement deals and talking about how Paige Bueckers was going to revolutionize the women's game, marketing executives in boardrooms across America were staring at spreadsheets with increasingly worried expressions. Her Nike signature logo, that paint bucket design that looked like it was created during a lunch break. It wasn't moving merchandise. Her WNBA debut on N639,000 viewers on a network most Americans couldn't find with a map and a flashlight. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark's Wilson basketball was selling out in 48 hours. Her signature shoes gone in minutes. Her rookie debut 2.12 million viewers on ESPN. Do you see the gap here? This isn't a small difference. This is a canyon, a massive, undeniable chasm between manufactured hype and genuine consumer demand. And Nike saw it too. But here's where things get interesting. Because losing money on an athlete, that happens. Companies write off bad investments all the time. It's embarrassing, but it's survivable. What's not survivable is a scandal. What's not recoverable is when your signature athlete becomes associated with something that threatens your brand image. And that's exactly what happened. The suitcase incident didn't start as headline news. It started as whispers, internal discussions, quiet meetings behind closed doors. By the time it reached the media, the decision had already been made. But what was actually in that suitcase? What triggered such an immediate response from one of the world's largest athletic brands? That's what we're going to unpack in this video. Because the official statements you've seen, they're corporate damage control. Carefully worded press releases designed to protect shareholders and minimize liability. The truth is far more complicated and honestly far more revealing about how the entire sports marketing industry actually works. You're going to understand why corporations were willing to throw millions at athletes who couldn't generate returns. You're going to see the exact moment Nike realized their investment was a disaster. And you're going to witness what happens when the carefully constructed narrative finally collapses. But first, we need to go back to where this all started. Back to when Nike made the decision that would eventually cost them millions. Back to when the warning signs were already there, flashing bright red. And everyone chose to ignore them because this story isn't just about Paige Bueckers. This story is about what happens when corporations choose politics over profit. And receipts, they're devastating. Let's rewind to January 2024. Nike executives are sitting in a conference room in Beaverton, Oregon. Charts on the wall, projections on screens, marketing teams presenting their strategy for women's basketball. And right at the center of that strategy, Paige Bueckers. The plan was simple. At least it seems simple on paper. Sign Bueckers early. Lock her in before the WNBA draft. Position her as the face of Nike women's basketball for the next decade. Create a signature shoe line. Dominate the market. Easy, right? Except there was one massive problem nobody wanted to address. The consumer data was screaming something different. You see, while Nike's marketing team was building mood boards and designing logos, their analytics department was pulling numbers that should have stopped this deal in its tracks. Social media engagement modest at best. Nowhere near the viral moments that drive actual merchandise sales. Jersey sales during her college career solid for UConn, but nothing that suggested crossover appeal to casual fans. Television ratings when she played, good for women's college basketball, but a fraction of what another player was generating just a few states away in Iowa. And that player's name kept coming up in every single meeting. Caitlin Clark. Here's what you need to understand about corporate sponsorship deals. Companies don't just pay athletes because they're talented. Talent is table stakes. Talent gets you in the door. Talent means nothing if you can't move product. What corporations pay for his influence, cultural penetration, the ability to make average consumers who don't even watch basketball suddenly care about your brand. And by every measurable metric, Caitlin Clark had that in abundance. Her games were events, sports center highlights, water cooler conversations. Parents who hadn't watched women's basketball in decades were suddenly tuning in. That's not marketing spin. That's documented reality. So why did Nike go all in on Clark? This is where it gets uncomfortable because the answer reveals something about corporate decision-making that executives will never admit publicly. They didn't choose Bueckers because the data supported it. They chose Bueckers because choosing Clark felt too obvious. Let me explain. In corporate America, there's immense pressure to appear progressive, to make decisions that will generate positive headlines in certain publications to avoid being criticized for simply following market demand. Nike had already been burned by controversies. Colin Kaepernick, various athlete scandals. They were sensitive about public perception in ways that sometimes overrode pure business logic. And Caitlin Clark, for all her obvious marketability, came with perceived risk. She was too popular with the wrong demographics in the eyes of certain marketing executives. Her fan base skewed in directions that made boardroom progressives uncomfortable. So they hedged. They signed Clark to a deal. Sure. But they didn't give her the signature treatment. They didn't build campaigns around her dominance. Instead, they elevated Bueckers. They created the paint bucket logo. They announced partnership after partnership designed to manufacture the star power that Clark had organically generated. It was a calculated bet, and it was absolutely the wrong one. But here's where the suitcase enters the picture. Because Nike could have survived a bad marketing bet. They've made plenty of those over the years. You take the loss, you adjust strategy, you move forward. What Nike couldn't survive was what happened in early 2025. What they couldn't ignore was what was discovered during a routine compliance review of their sponsored athletes. See, when you're a Nike signature athlete, you're not just representing yourself. You're representing a brand worth over $50 billion. There are clauses in those contracts, morality provisions, behavioral expectations, and there are things that trigger immediate termination, things that corporate legal teams move on with zero hesitation. The suitcase incident didn't become public immediately. It started as an internal matter. A report filed, questions asked, investigations launched. By the time the media caught wind, the decision was already made. But what exactly happened? What was in that suitcase that made Nike pull the plug so fast? The answer is more shocking than you might expect. And it connects to a pattern of behavior that had been quietly documented for months. Before I tell you about the suitcase, you need to understand something crucial. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the final straw in a pattern that Nike's compliance team had been tracking for months. See, when major corporations sign athletes to multimillion-dollar deals, they don't just hand over a check and walk away. They monitor everything. Social media posts, public appearances, travel records, association networks. It sounds invasive because it is invasive, but there's a reason for it. One wrong association, one problematic connection, one viral moment that contradicts brand values, and suddenly a company's stock price takes a hit. Nike learned this the hard way multiple times. So when they signed Paige Bueckers, they assigned a full compliance team, regular check-ins, quarterly reviews, the works, and for the first few months, everything looked fine. She was doing the media rounds, practicing with unrivaled, building relationships with other players, standard stuff. But then the reports started coming in. The first flag was small, a missed appearance, a scheduled Nike promotional event in Dallas that she simply didn't show up for. The excuse, travel complications. Nike accepted it, rescheduled, moved on. The second flag was bigger. A social media post that violated brand guidelines. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to trigger a warning letter from the legal department. Again, Bueckers apologized, said it wouldn't happen again. Nike accepted it. But here's what they didn't know at the time. Behind the scenes, something else was developing. Something that connected to individuals Nike absolutely could not afford to be associated with. Now, I want to be very clear about something. Paige Bueckers is an incredible basketball player. Her skills on the court are undeniable. She won a national championship. She dominated college basketball for years. Her talent was never in question. But talent doesn't protect you from contractual obligations. And talent doesn't insulate corporations from reputational risk. When Nike's team discover what was happening, they face an immediate decision. Quietly end the partnership and hope nobody notices, or wait and risk becoming part of a story they couldn't control. They chose option 1. The termination notice went out on a Tuesday morning, effective immediately. No press conference, no formal announcement, just a quiet severing of ties that corporate communications hope would fly under the radar. But nothing stays quiet in the age of social media. Within hours, people noticed that Nike had scrubbed Bueckers from their website. The promotional materials disappeared. The signature logo that had just been revealed gone. And that's when the questions started. Reporters began calling. Influencers started speculating, and someone somewhere leaked information about a suitcase. Now, let's talk about what that actually means. The term suitcase scandal sounds dramatic. And honestly, it is dramatic, but not in the way you might think. This wasn't about illegal contents. This wasn't about contraband at airports. This was about documentation, specifically documentation that reveal financial arrangements Nike knew nothing about. See, when you're a signature athlete with a major brand, you have disclosure requirements, side deals, promotional arrangements, anything that could create a conflict of interest or brand confusion. You have to tell them it's in the contract. Clear as day. And according to sources inside Nike's compliance department, what they discovered was a series of undisclosed arrangements that violated multiple provisions of Bueckers' agreement. Arrangements that connected the companies Nike considered direct competitors. Arrangements that had been hidden in ways that suggested intentional concealment. The suitcase reference that came from how the documentation was discovered during a routine review of travel records and associated receipts. Physical documents in an era of digital everything kept separate from electronic records for a reason. When Nike's legal team saw what they were dealing with, the decision became simple. This wasn't just a contract violation. This was a trust violation. And in the world of corporate sponsorships, trust is everything. You can recover from poor sales. You can recover from bad marketing decisions. You can even recover from minor scandals if you handle them correctly. But you cannot recover from an athlete who deliberately hid information that could damage your brand. The termination was immediate. The silence from Nike was intentional. And the fallout was just beginning. Because here's what nobody anticipated. This wasn't just going to affect Nike. This was going to ripple across every single corporate partnership Paige Bueckers had. And those partnerships, they were about to start falling like dominoes. Within 72 hours, the phone started ringing. Not calls to Paige Bueckers, calls between corporate legal teams. See, when Nike makes a move like this, other companies pay attention, immediate attention. Because Nike doesn't terminate signature athletes quietly without a very good reason. And every brand that had invested in Bueckers suddenly wanted to know what that reason was. Lego was first. Remember that partnership announcement? The one where they used Iowa Hawkeye colors to promote a Dallas Wings player. The one that made zero marketing sense from day one. Their legal team reached out to Nike within 24 hours of the termination notice leaking. The conversation was brief. What Nike shared was enough. By the end of that week, Lego issued a statement that their partnership with Paige Bueckers was under review pending evaluation of new information. Corporate speak for "we're looking for the exit door." But here's what made the situation uniquely devastating. It wasn't just about losing deals. It was about how those deals were structured. You see, most major athlete endorsements include something called clawback provisions. If an athlete violates the terms of the agreement, the company doesn't just terminate the relationship, they can demand money back, signing bonuses, advance payments, marketing reimbursements. All of it becomes recoverable if the athlete breached their contractual obligations, and based on what Nike discovered, multiple breaches had occurred. We're not talking about small amounts here. Nike's initial deal with Bueckers was reportedly worth over $5 million. Lego's partnership, while smaller, still represented significant guaranteed money. If both companies pursued clawback provisions, and corporate lawyers almost always do, Bueckers could be facing repayment demands in the millions. Before she'd even played a single professional game, let that sink in. An athlete positioned as a future of women's basketball, potentially owing more money than she'd ever earned. But the financial implications were only part of the story. The reputational damage was spreading faster than any legal filing could. Sports media, which had spent 2 years building the Bueckers narrative, suddenly found itself scrambling to explain what happened. The same outlets that pushed her as Caitlin Clark's rival, as the next signature superstar, as a face of women's basketball's future, they were now running damage control. And damage control in media looks like silence. Have you noticed how quiet ESPN has been about this? How the usual talking heads who couldn't stop mentioning Bueckers during her college career have suddenly found other topics to discuss. That's not coincidence. That's coordinated retreat. Because nobody wants to be associated with a story that's still developing in negative directions. Meanwhile, Unrivaled had a decision to make. The league had positioned Bueckers as one of its featured faces. Marketing materials were already printed. Promotional campaigns were already running, but now those materials featured an athlete in the middle of a corporate scandal. Do you keep promoting her and risk your brand being dragged into the controversy? Or do you quietly shift focus to other players and hope nobody notices a pivot? Unrivaled chose a middle path. They didn't drop Bueckers entirely. She was still on the roster. She was still play, but the promotional emphasis changed almost overnight. Suddenly, other players were getting more camera time. Other faces were appearing in advertisements. The league's social media shifted focus with surgical precision. And Bueckers went from featured star to just another player. That might sound like a minor adjustment, but in the world of professional sports marketing, visibility is everything. When your face stops appearing in promotions, sponsors notice. Future deals become harder to negotiate. Your market value drops. It's a slow fade that can end careers before they really begin. Now, you might be wondering why the details of the Suitcase Scandal have been fully disclosed publicly. Why hasn't Nike released a statement explaining exactly what happened? Why hasn't anyone with direct knowledge gone on record? The answer is legal exposure. Both sides have reasons to keep the specifics quiet. Nike doesn't want to reveal how an athlete they signed passed through their vetting process without these issues being discovered. That raises questions about their due diligence, and Bueckers certainly doesn't want the details public because of how damaging they could be to any future endorsement opportunities. So, both parties have agreed to a kind of mutual silence. But silence doesn't mean the story is over. It just means the story is happening in places we can't directly see. Courtrooms, arbitration hearings, closed-door negotiations. And while those proceedings play out privately, the public consequences continue to compound because there was one more partnership that hadn't made its decision yet. One more company that was watching the situation unfold and calculating whether to stay or go. A company whose decision would reveal more about corporate strategy in women's basketball than anything else that had happened. And their answer, it shocked everyone. Gatorade. That was the company everyone was watching. While Nike terminated and Lego retreated, Gatorade had remained conspicuously silent. No statements, no leaks, no indication of which direction they were leaning. And in corporate America, silence usually means one of two things. Either they're preparing a quiet exit, or they're about to do something nobody expects. Gatorade chosen a second option. 3 weeks after the Nike termination became public, Gatorade released a statement that sent shockwaves through the sports marketing world. They were not only keeping Paige Bueckers, they were expanding her role. New commercial spots, increased visibility, a feature position in their upcoming women's sports campaign. The internet exploded. How could this make any sense? Nike just fired her. Lego was running for the exits. Corporate sponsors were treating her like radioactive material, and Gatorade doubled down. Here's what you need to understand about what was really happening. This wasn't about Paige Bueckers. This was about Gatorade sending a message to Nike. See, the sports beverage market is brutally competitive. Gatorade, Powerade, Body Armor, and a dozen smaller brands are constantly fighting for athlete endorsements and market share. When Nike dropped Bueckers, Gatorade saw an opportunity, not an opportunity to support an athlete they believed in, an opportunity to embarrass a competitor by publicly standing behind Bueckers while Nike walked away. Gatorade was essentially saying, "We're not afraid of whatever you found. We'll take your discards and turn them into our featured stars." It was corporate chess, a power move designed to make Nike look reactive and fearful, while Gatorade appeared loyal and confident. But here's the twist nobody anticipated. It backfired spectacularly because whatever Nike discovered in that suitcase, it didn't stay contained. Within 2 weeks of Gatorade's announcement, additional information began leaking. Details that painted a more complete picture of what had actually happened. And suddenly, Gatorade's bold stand started looking less like corporate courage and more like corporate incompetence. Their stock took a hit, not a massive one, but enough to notice. Analysts started questioning the decision-making in their marketing department. Shareholders asked uncomfortable questions during earnings calls. The very move designed to make Nike look bad ended up making Gatorade look worse. And that's when the real conversation started. Because this wasn't just about one athlete anymore. This was about the entire infrastructure of corporate sponsorship in women's basketball. Think about what we've witnessed over the past 2 years. Company after company has thrown money at athletes who don't generate returns. They've created products for audiences that don't exist. They've made decisions based on narratives instead of numbers. Nike with the paint bucket logo. Lego with the Iowa Hawkeye colors for a Dallas Wings player. Multiple brands investing millions in Unrivaled without any television distribution deal in place. And now Gatorade doubling down on an athlete in the middle of a scandal because they wanted to score points against competitor. This isn't strategic marketing. This is corporations treating women's basketball like a playground for the political and competitive games. And the athletes, they're caught in the middle. Paige Bueckers deserves better than being used as a pawn in corporate warfare. She deserves partners who are genuinely invested in her success, not companies using her situation to make statements. But that's not what she's getting. Instead, she's getting Gatorade using her controversy to embarrass Nike. She's getting Lego scrambling to distance themselves. She's getting media outlets that build her up now pretending she doesn't exist. And through all of this, the one player who consistently generates actual results keeps getting overlooked. Caitlin Clark's merchandise continues to sell out. Her games continue to draw record ratings. Her Wilson partnership continues to break sales records. And yet, corporations keep making decisions that ignore her dominance in favor of manufactured alternatives. Why? Because following the obvious path feels too simple. Because admitting that one player is significantly more marketable than others contradicts preferred narratives. Because corporate executives would rather lose money on ideological bets than face criticism for following market demand. And the Bueckers situation is the inevitable result of this broken approach. When you sign athletes based on narratives instead of data, you're rolling dice. Sometimes you get lucky. Most of the time you don't. And when the luck runs out, when the scandals emerge, when the termination notices get signed, everyone acts surprised, but nobody should be surprised. The warning signs were always there. The numbers never supported these decisions. And now the consequences are arriving one by one, company by company. And the biggest consequence of all, it hasn't even hit yet. Because there's one more piece of the story that changes everything. One revelation that makes the Suitcase Scandal look like a warm-up act. And it involves a name nobody expected to see connected to the situation. The name was buried in legal documents, 14 pages deep in a filing that was never supposed to become public. And when it surfaced, everything about the scandal shifted into a completely different gear. I'm going to tell you who it was. But first, you need to understand why this name matters so much. Because it's not just about one person. It's about a network, a pattern, a system of connections that explains how he got here in the first place. The name, a senior marketing executive at ESPN. Let that sink in for a moment. Not an athlete, not an agent, not a business manager, someone inside the media machine that built the narratives these corporations relied on. According to documents reviewed by multiple independent sources, this executive had undisclosed financial arrangements connected to promotional strategies for specific WNBA players. The arrangements influenced which specific athletes received favorable coverage, which stories got amplified, which comparisons got pushed to the top of SportsCenter broadcasts. And one of those athletes was Paige Bueckers. Now, before we go further, I need to be careful here. These are allegations contained in legal filings. Nothing has been proven in court. The executive in question has denied any wrongdoing. But here's what we know for certain. The documentation discovered in Bueckers' suitcase included references to this individual, payment records, communication logs, strategic planning documents that outline how media narratives would be shaped to maximize endorsement opportunities. When Nike's legal team saw these documents, they didn't just see a contract violation. They saw potential exposure to a much larger scandal involving media manipulation. And that changed everything because Nike can survive an athlete breach. What Nike cannot survive is being dragged into a federal investigation about coordinated market manipulation between athletes, agents, and media executives. The termination wasn't about the contract violation itself. It was about distance. Maximum possible distance from whatever was coming next. And Nike's instincts were right. Within weeks of the initial leak, investigators from multiple agencies started making inquiries. Not public investigations, not the kind with press conferences and camera crews, quiet conversations, document requests, the kind of preliminary work that happens before major cases go public. The sports media world suddenly got very nervous because if one ESPN executive had undisclosed arrangements influencing coverage, how many others might be involved? How deep did this go? How many of the narratives we consumed over the past 3 years were manufactured rather than organic? Think about what we've witnessed. The relentless pushing of the Bueckers versus Clark rivalry. Even when the ratings clearly showed one player dramatically outperforming the other, the constant elevation of certain athletes while others who generated better numbers received less coverage, the bizarre marketing decisions by major corporations that seemed to contradict obvious market data. What if none of that was accidental? What if it was coordinated? What if the entire media ecosystem around women's basketball was being manipulated by individuals with financial incentives to promote specific outcomes? That's the question investigators are now asking. And the answers could reshape how we understand sports media entirely. But back to Bueckers because her situation went from bad to catastrophic once these connections emerged. It's one thing to lose a Nike deal for contract violations. It's another thing entirely to be connected to what could become a federal investigation into media manipulation. Suddenly, every brand that had ever considered working with her was conducting emergency reviews. Lawyers were pulling contracts. Marketing teams were scrubbing future plans. PR departments were preparing contingency statements. The phone calls that used to be about new opportunities were now about damage assessment. How exposed are we? What's our liability? How fast can we exit? And the most devastating part, Bueckers may not have even fully understood what she was part of. Young athletes trust the people around them. Agents, managers, marketing professionals. They sign documents they don't fully read. They participate in arrangements they don't fully understand. That's not an excuse. Ignorance doesn't eliminate responsibility, but it does paint a more complicated picture than simple villain. Paige Bueckers may have been a participant in something she didn't fully grasp. A pawn in a much larger game played by people who saw her talent as a vehicle for their own financial schemes. And now she's facing consequences while some of those people remain unnamed and unexposed, at least for now. Because investigations have a way of expanding. Names have a way of surfacing. And the documentation that started all of this, there's more of it, much more. And what's contained in those additional documents reportedly involves names that would shock the entire sports world. Names that go far beyond one ESPN executive. Names that reach into the highest levels of women's basketball administration itself. Let me be direct with you. What I'm about to share crosses a line that most sports commentators won't touch. Not because it's speculation, but because the implications are so significant that speaking about them invites serious pushback. I'm going to tell you anyway, because you deserve to understand the full picture. The additional documentation I mentioned, the material that goes beyond the ESPN executive, it reportedly contains communication records between individuals inside the WNBA league office and external marketing consultants. Communications that discuss strategic athlete promotion, not based on performance metrics, not based on market research, not based on consumer demand, based on demographic considerations that had nothing to do with basketball. Let me say that more clearly. According to sources who have reviewed portions of this documentation, there were active discussions at the league level about which athletes should receive promotional priority based on factors completely unrelated to their ability to generate ratings or sell merchandise. Caitlin Clark's name appears in these discussions, but not in the way you might expect. The conversations reportedly centered on how to elevate alternative stars, specifically to prevent Clark from becoming too dominant in the public consciousness. Read that again. Prevent her from becoming too dominant. Not because she wasn't marketable, but because she was too marketable in ways that made certain decision-makers uncomfortable. Her fan-base demographics, her cultural positioning, her organic appeal to audiences that the league apparently didn't want. Prioritize. So they made a choice. Actively direct resources toward building up competitors who could provide balance. Athletes like Paige Bueckers, athletes like Aya Wilson, athletes who fit preferred narrative frameworks. Now this isn't about those athletes' abilities. Aya Wilson is a legitimate superstar, two-time MVP, Olympic gold medalist. Her basketball credentials are unimpeachable. Paige Bueckers is genuinely talented, national championship winner, elite college player. This isn't about them. This is about the system that decided which athletes would receive institutional support and which would be strategically limited. A system that apparently operated in direct contradiction to market forces. A system that chose ideology over economics. And a system that is now potentially facing exposure. Because here's what happens when documentation like this enters legal proceedings. It becomes discoverable. Lawyers can subpoena it. Investigators can demand it. Courts can compel its release. The quiet conversations that happen behind closed doors, they don't stay quiet forever. And the people who participated in those conversations, they're now extremely nervous. Multiple sources have indicated that senior figures within the WNBA have retained personal legal counsel in recent weeks. Non-league provided attorneys. Personal representation. That's not what innocent people typically do when they have nothing to hide. That's what people do when they're preparing for scrutiny. And the scrutiny is coming because the Bueckers situation opened a door that cannot be closed. The Suitcase documentation led to the ESPN executive. The ESPN executive's connections led to the league office. The league office communications reveal strategic decisions that may constitute market manipulation. Each revelation creates pressure for the next revelation. Each name that surfaces create incentive for other names to cooperate. It's a cascade and we're still in the early stages. Meanwhile, the one athlete who has been systematically disadvantaged by all of this continues to perform. Caitlin Clark's second WNBA season is approaching. Her merchandise continues to outsell the rest of the league combined. Her social media engagement continues to dwarf her peers. Her games continue to generate ratings that other players cannot approach. And she's done all of this while facing institutional headwinds that we're only now beginning to understand. Think about what her numbers might look like if she had received the same promotional support that was actively directed elsewhere. Think about what women's basketball's growth might look like if market forces had been followed instead of resisted. Think about how many casual fans might have been converted into dedicated followers if the league had embraced its most marketable asset instead of trying to manufacture alternatives. The opportunity cost is staggering, and the people responsible for that missed opportunity. They're currently more concerned with their legal exposure than with growing the sport. That's the reality of where we are right now. A scandal that started with a suitcase has expanded into something that threatens to reshape the entire landscape of women's professional basketball. Careers will end. Relationships will fracture. And the truth, when it fully emerges, will force a reckoning that's long overdue. But there's one more element we need to discuss. One more piece of this puzzle that connects everything together, and it involves money. Massive amounts of money. Money that was supposed to go one place but ended up somewhere else entirely. Follow the money. That's what investigators always say because money never lies. Money leaves trails. Money creates records that survive long after conversations are forgotten and memories become conveniently fuzzy. And in this situation, the money trail leads somewhere deeply troubling. Let me explain how athlete endorsement deals typically work. A company like Nike agrees to pay an athlete a certain amount. Let's say $5 million over 3 years. That money flows through specific channels. Agent fees come off the top, usually around 10 to 15%. Taxes are withheld. The remainder goes to the athlete, clean, documented, traceable. But what the Suitcase documentation revealed was a parallel payment structure. Money flowing through entities that weren't disclosed in the primary Nike contract. Shell companies registered in states with minimal reporting requirements. Consulting fees paid individuals who provided no apparent consulting services. In other words, hidden money. And when you find hidden money in professional sports, you found a problem much bigger than contract violations. You potentially found fraud. The amounts weren't trivial. According to financial records contained in the documentation, payments totaling over $800,000 moved through these undisclosed channels over an 18-month period. $800,000 that Nike knew nothing about. $800,000 that potentially represented conflicts of interest with competing brands. $800,000 that may have been connected to the media manipulation arrangements we discussed earlier. Now, where did this money come from? That's where the investigation gets really interesting. Some of it appears to have originated from overseas sports betting operations, not American sportsbooks operating under state regulations, international platforms with minimal oversight and maximum interest in influencing how certain athletes are perceived and promoted. Think about the implications of that for a moment. If betting operations are paying money to influence athlete promotion, they're not doing it out of generosity. They're doing it because that promotion affects betting lines. It affects public perception. It affects where money flows when people place wagers. And that's not just a contract violation. That's potentially criminal. Sports betting in America is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's regulated. It's monitored. And the one thing that regulators absolutely cannot tolerate is manipulation. When the initial Bueckers termination happened, most people assumed it was about brand conflicts or minor disclosure failures. Nobody anticipated the trail would lead to international betting operations. Nobody expected that the suitcase would contain evidence of financial arrangements designed to influence how athletes were promoted in American sports media. But that's exactly what appears to have happened. And the regulatory response is building. Multiple state gaming commissions have reportedly opened preliminary inquiries. Federal agencies with jurisdiction over wire fraud and international financial transactions are asking questions. The Department of Justice, which has been increasingly active in sports betting regulation, is monitoring the situation. This isn't going away. This is expanding. And everyone connected to these financial arrangements is now facing potential exposure that goes far beyond losing endorsement deals. We're talking about possible criminal liability for the agents who structured these payments, for the executives who facilitated them, for the media figures who received them, and yes, potentially for athletes who knowingly participated in them. The question of what Paige Bueckers knew and when she knew it becomes legally critical. If she was aware that undisclosed payments were flowing through these channels, her legal exposure is significant. If she was genuinely unaware, used by handlers who kept her in the dark, her exposure is reduced but not eliminated. Athletes have responsibility to understand their financial arrangements. Ignorance is an explanation, not an excuse. And based on the documentation that surfaced so far, the argument for complete ignorance becomes harder to sustain because some of the records include communications that appear to come directly from Bueckers, not from her representatives. From her messages discussing payment timing, references to specific amounts, acknowledgments of receipt, the kind of direct involvement that makes claims of ignorance difficult to maintain. Now, I want to be very clear about something. We are still in early stages here. Investigations are ongoing. Nothing has been proven in court. Everyone is entitled to presumption of innocence. But the trajectory of the situation is unmistakable. What started as a corporate sponsorship termination has evolved into something with potential criminal dimensions. What seemed like a marketing failure has revealed possible fraud. What appeared to be one athlete's problem may expose an entire network of manipulation and the people at the center of that network. They're scrambling. Lawyers are being retained. Documents are being reviewed. Strategies are being developed. But here's what they don't understand. When documentation enters legal proceedings, control is lost. What happens next isn't up to them anymore. It's up to investigators, prosecutors, courts, and the truth has a way of emerging. No matter how much money is spent trying to bury it, the reckoning is coming for everyone involved. There's a moment in every scandal when the narrative shifts. When the people who built their careers defending the indefensible suddenly go quiet. When the media outlets that push certain stories start distancing themselves. When the corporate executives who made disastrous decisions begin updating their resumes. We've reached that moment, and what happens next will determine the future of women's basketball for the next decade. Let me paint a picture of where we are right now. Paige Bueckers is still playing for Unrivaled. Games are happening. She's on the court, but the promotional machine that was supposed to build her into a superstar has completely stalled. Her social media engagement has dropped 60% since the scandal broke. Media requests that used to flood her management team have slowed to a trickle. The brands that were supposed to line up after her WNBA debut are nowhere to be found. She's become radioactive. And the cruelest part, she's still incredibly talented. Watch her play and you see genuine skill, elite court vision, scoring ability. The things that made her a college sensation haven't disappeared. But talent doesn't matter when corporate America has decided you're a liability. Talent doesn't matter when your name is connected to investigations that could result in federal charges. Talent doesn't matter when the very system that was supposed to elevate you has been exposed as corrupt. Meanwhile, the WNBA is facing an existential question. How do you market a league when your marketing strategies have been revealed as potentially fraudulent? How do you attract new sponsors when existing sponsors are running for the exits? How do you build credibility with fans who now question whether anything they've been told about player popularity was genuine? These aren't hypothetical concerns. These are conversations happening right now in league offices. The WNBA's television ratings, which were supposed to build on last season's Caitlin Clark-driven success, are showing early signs of softening, not collapsing. Not yet. But the growth trajectory that seemed inevitable 6 months ago is no longer certain. And here's the darkest irony of all. The one player who could stabilize everything, who could restore credibility, who could give fans something authentic to believe in. She was the one the system tried to suppress. Caitlin Clark didn't need manufactured narratives. She didn't need coordinated media campaigns. She didn't need executives in boardrooms deciding that she deserved promotion. She generated organic demand through pure, undeniable excellence. And for that, she was apparently viewed as a problem to be managed rather than an asset to be maximized. Think about how backward that is. The league's most valuable player, treated as a threat by the very institution that should have been celebrating her. The athlete generating historic ratings viewed with suspicion by executives who preferred controllable alternatives. The genuine article undermined by people promoting manufactured products. It would be absurd if it weren't so damaging. Because here's what the WNBA doesn't seem to understand. Fans aren't stupid. They can tell when they're being manipulated. They can sense when narratives are being forced rather than earned. They know the difference between authentic stardom and corporate construction. And when the truth about that manipulation emerges, when the documentation becomes public, when the investigations conclude, when the full story is told, trust will be shattered in ways that take years to rebuild, maybe decades. Sports leagues survive scandals all the time. The NFL survived Bountygate. The NBA survived referee betting scandals. MLB survived steroids. But those leagues had deep reservoirs of fan loyalty built over generations. They had cultural positions so entrenched that fans would forgive almost anything. The WNBA doesn't have that luxury. It's still building its foundation. Still establishing its place in American sports culture. Still trying to convert casual viewers into dedicated fans. And now, at the worst possible moment, the methods used to build that foundation are being exposed as corrupt. The timing couldn't be worse. Women's basketball was experiencing genuine momentum, real growth. Authentic interest driven by compelling athletes and improving product quality. That momentum is now at risk. Not because the basketball isn't entertaining, but because the institutions surrounding the basketball have been revealed as untrustworthy, and trust once lost is extraordinarily difficult to regain. So where do we go from here? What happens next? That depends on decisions that haven't been made yet. Decisions by investigators about who to charge. Decisions by corporations about who to support. Decisions by fans about whether to keep watching, and one decision that could change everything. A decision that sources say is being actively considered at the highest levels of women's basketball. A decision so dramatic that it would reshape the entire landscape overnight. 2 weeks ago, a source close to the investigation shared something with me that I haven't shared anywhere else. Something that changes everything we thought we understood about the scandal. And I've been sitting on it waiting for the right moment, because honestly I wasn't sure the world was ready to hear it. But after everything we've uncovered together over the past 9 parts, you deserve a complete picture. The source told me that the investigation isn't actually about Paige Bueckers. Not really. She's a piece of the puzzle, an important piece, but ultimately she's peripheral to what investigators are really pursuing. They're pursuing the network, the system, the infrastructure of manipulation that allowed this to happen in the first place. And according to my source, the investigation is about to make a move that will shock the entire sports world. Arrest warrants have been prepared now for athletes, for executives, media executives, league executives, corporate executives, the architects of a system that manufacture narratives instead of following market demand, names that would make your jaw drop, positions that carry enormous influence in sports media. And the evidence, it's overwhelming. Documentation that traces every payment. Communication that reveals every coordination. Financial records that expose every conflict of interest. The net is closing, and the first arrests could happen within days. But here's what really matters. This isn't just about punishment. It's about reckoning. A reckoning that the sports marketing industry has been avoiding for years. Because what the scandal reveals at its core is that corporations don't actually care about women's basketball. Not really. They care about appearing to care. They care about checking boxes. They care about marketing campaigns that generate positive press coverage while actual market performance goes ignored. Nike didn't sign Paige Bueckers because she would sell shoes. They signed her because signing her generated the right kind of headlines. It positioned them as supporters of women's sports in ways that felt progressive and modern. The product performance was always secondary until the product stopped performing, until the documentation revealed arrangements that couldn't be ignored. Until the liability became too great to tolerate. And now look where we are. An athlete's reputation destroyed. Corporate partnerships shattered. Investigations expanding. Fans questioning everything they've been told. All because companies made decisions based on optics instead of evidence. All because executives chose narratives over numbers. All because the system prioritized how things looked over how they actually performed. This is what happens when you ignore market forces. This is what happens when you manufacture stars instead of discovering them. This is what happens when corporations decide they know better than consumers what consumers should want. The market has spoken. Consumers have voted, and corporations spent years pretending they didn't hear. Now they're paying the price. And the worst part, the athletes paid too. Paige Bueckers, whether she understood what she was part of or not, is going to face consequences that could follow her for years. The executives who manipulated her, they'll face consequences too. But the system that enabled them, that system will survive. It always does. New executives will replace old executives. New companies will make new deals. New narratives will be manufactured. The machine keeps running. Because at the end of the day, corporations don't actually need women's basketball to succeed. They need to appear supportive of women's basketball. Those are different things. And as long as that remains true, we'll keep seeing deals that don't make sense. Partnerships that generate no returns. Marketing campaigns built on hope instead of data. We'll keep watching corporations throw money out of moving cars, wondering why nothing sticks. But here's where this gets interesting. There's one athlete who broke through all of that noise. One athlete who generated genuine demand despite institutional resistance. One athlete whose numbers were so undeniable that even the system couldn't fully suppress her. Caitlin Clark. Her WNBA debut drew 2.12 million viewers. Her jersey sales shatter records. Her merchandise sold out faster than the league had ever seen. And she did it without the coordinated support that others received. Without the strategic promotion, without the executive backing, she did it the old-fashioned way. She earned it on the court with her talent, with her competitive fire, with a kind of authentic excellence that cannot be manufactured, cannot be faked, cannot be bought. And now, as the investigations unfold and the reckonings begin, there's a question that everyone in women's basketball is asking. What happens when the smoke clears? What happens when the manufactured narratives collapse under the weight of their own fraud? What happens when fans finally understand what they've been watching? The answer is simple. The authentic survives. The manufactured doesn't. Caitlin Clark's numbers will keep growing. Her influence will keep expanding. Her impact on the sport will keep deepening because none of that ever depended on corporate marketing campaigns. It depended on her shooting ability, on her court vision, on the way she makes every single person in the arena believe that something magical is about to happen. That's not marketing. That's stardom. Real stardom. The kind that cannot be created in a boardroom. The kind that cannot be terminated in a corporate memo. The kind that transcends scandals and investigations and all the noise of the sports media ecosystem that forgot its job was to report the truth, not manufacture it. The suitcase is empty now. The documentation has been reviewed. The investigations are advancing. And at the end of all of this, when the final reports are filed and the final statements are released and the final executives have made their court appearances, only one thing will remain. The game. The beautiful, unpredictable, extraordinary game played by athletes who earned their spots. Watched by fans who deserve better than manufactured narratives and led for better or worse by the one player who never needed anyone's help to become a star. The scandal will fade. The investigations will conclude. The executives will face whatever consequences await them. But Caitlin Clark will still be there, draining threes, breaking records, changing the sport. And someday when historians look back at this moment in women's basketball, they'll see it clearly. They'll see which athlete generated genuine demand. They'll see which athletes were manufactured. They'll see who mattered and who was just supposed to matter. The numbers don't lie. The merchandise doesn't lie. The television ratings don't lie. And now, finally, neither does the documentation. This is the end of one story, but it's just the beginning of another. The story of what happens when the truth finally catches up to the narrative. The story of what happens when consumers demand better than what corporations are selling. The story of what happens when authentic excellence refuses to be suppressed. Starts now. And it starts with a simple question. Are you ready to see what women's basketball actually looks like when nobody's controlling the narrative? Are you ready to watch the real thing? Because here it comes. Whether anyone was ready or